We are just days away from the confirmation hearing for Trump's former defense attorney and now acting Attorney General Todd Blanche to become the 88th U.S. Attorney General. It's been a little more than 3 months since Blanche took the reins at the DOJ after Trump's last Attorney General, Pam Bondi, was fired, reportedly in part due to Trump's growing frustration with the pace of prosecutions against his perceived political rivals. In just that short time, Blanche has shown his willingness to allow his former client to assert himself, as Trump has repeatedly declared to be the, quote, chief law enforcement officer of the United States. Political rivals have been targeted, journalists have been subpoenaed, and election officials have been threatened not in the pursuit of upholding the rule of law, but upholding the rule of one man. With the DOJ expending its time and resources on these matters, it raises the concern of what real threats are being overlooked. And for those career employees working within the DOJ, the message is clear. Take part in these investigations or face the consequences. MS Now is reporting that 2 Atlanta-based FBI intelligence analysts were fired last week after refusing to participate in the Trump administration's investigation of Georgia's 2020 presidential election, according to 3 people familiar with the matter. MS Now adds, the analysts, a husband and wife, told colleagues they didn't believe the investigation was justified under FBI and Justice Department policies, the people said. And that was apparently what it took to lead to the couple getting escorted out of their offices. The FBI neither confirmed nor denied that the 2 analysts were fired. Joining us now, Melissa Murray, MS Now legal analyst, NYU law professor, and author of the book My Mother is Listening to, The U.S. Constitution, a comprehensive and annotated guide for the modern reader, and Andrew Weissman, MS Now legal analyst and author of Liar's Kingdom, How to Stop Trump's Deceit and Save America. Melissa, Andrew, thank you both for coming to the weekend. Andrew, since you are not here at the table, I will start with you. It's stories like the one coming out of Georgia, the analysts being fired. I mean, we've seen this type of story since Trump's return to the White House. But what does a story like that of analysts being fired because they won't go along with what the administration wants to do, the impact that has inside DOJ, inside the agencies that are under the Department of Justice's umbrella?
Well, I think it's because of firings like that that you have over 1,200 former Department of Justice officials who have signed a letter they're saying that they do not support and are encouraging strongly that Todd Blanche not be confirmed. He has completely undermined, as the letter states, the morale of the Department of Justice. I should say that the analysts who were fired are very much vindicated by the decision of the federal judge who just recently, this past week, quashed a subpoena in that very matter. And this was a judge who was appointed by Donald Trump, saying that Todd Blanche and his Department of Justice are engaged in an arbitrary fishing expedition. That was the term that this judge used, and saying that there is no legitimate basis to have a federal grand jury investigation. And so, you know, the people who were fired, of which they are just 2 of the latest people, are being fired for what a federal judge has found to be an improper and not engaging in an improper and illegal grand jury investigation. It seems like that's going to definitely be fodder for the upcoming confirmation hearing of Todd Blanche.
Melissa, we had you on a great episode of Clock It with me and Simone, and we talked a lot about the Supreme Court. It was our July 4th episode, and one of the things that kind of has always in my head from listening to you, or for years really, is that the Supreme Court has made Donald Trump's kind of unitarian executive theory much easier than ever before.
The law now,
it is
allegedly.
So to the point of the elections that we're seeing, to the point of the DOJ doing whatever Donald Trump wants, it does seem like it is the law that the president can do whatever he wants. Is that accurate?
So we're going to find out, right? So, I mean, this certainly emboldens a president that was already asserting a very muscular vision of executive authority. The court's decision in Trump versus Slaughter, which said that the president could remove a commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission and did not have to worry about any kind of congressional constraint on that removal. There are real questions about how far that decision will go. Obviously, it doesn't extend to the Federal Reserve because it's different somehow.
But it does extend to the Election Assistance.
Well, it extends to the Election Assistance Commission, which we learned last week. It also may extend to the civil service. I mean, some of these DOJ alums who have signed on to this letter have protections under the civil service, protections that are statutorily ingrained. It is not clear how Trump versus Slaughter impacts those, and it leaves open a huge question. Like, it's not just these heads of agencies. The executive branch is composed of a lot of people, rank and file FBI members, people who work in the Department of Justice, people who work in all sorts of agencies. Are they subject to removal simply because the president does not want them there? If that is the case, then we have the prospect of one individual being able to remove huge swaths of career expertise across these agencies. That will make us certainly less effective in terms of what these agencies do, but maybe even less safe in terms of national security and intelligence and things like that.
Because they're focusing on things they weren't paying that much attention to, and therefore, what are they missing?
Well, and I do wonder, Melissa, just because you brought it up about the issue of whether civil servants are still protected, because there were also, the week before Slaughter came down, changes reportedly made to the federal merit system, which does protect civil servants and may no longer. And I guess I wonder, is that going to potentially make its way to the Supreme Court?
I think it's very likely. There's certainly the case of Maureen Comey, the former prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, the daughter of Jim Comey, who obviously has been a target of the president. She was unceremoniously removed from her place at the SDNY, and she has filed suit as well. Her argument is basically that she's protected under these statutory protections for civil servants, the Merit Protection Services. And the question going forward is this included in Slaughter? Is it encompassed in Slaughter? We don't know. And the court, to be very clear, was not particularly explicit about what the implications would be beyond the FTC and the fact that Slaughter did not apply to the Fed. So, TBD, watch this space.
Luckily, Melissa and Andrew are sticking with us. For the first time in more than 7 years, 2 Supreme Court justices will testify before Congress this week. Justices Amy Coney Barrett and Elena Kagan will appear Tuesday, as the Supreme Court has requested more than $14 million increase in its fiscal year 2027 budget for security for the 9 justices. Senior appropriators have said that they hope to keep questions tightly focused on operations and expenses of the court rather than legal matters. But the testimony comes as public confidence in the Supreme Court remains deeply divided. The scrutiny of the court has rarely been higher. Melissa Murray, Andrew Weissman are back with us. Okay, so before we pivot to the Supreme Court, Andrew, I just want to tie a bow on Todd Blanche's confirmation hearing this week. Oftentimes, lawmakers do not have the sharpest questions for these contentious hearings. What is one thing that you feel like won't be asked that should be asked of Todd Blanche?
Well, I don't know if it won't be asked, but there's a list that is just enormous. You can obviously start with the Epstein matters, the treatment of Ghislaine Maxwell, why the Department of Justice is not cooperating and turning over evidence in connection with the shootings of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, why Todd Blanche sought to indict 6 members of Congress for issuing a video comporting with the law, why he sought grand jury subpoenas that in investigations that have been quashed by federal judges. I mean, it goes on and on. Obviously, I think the slush fund will be a substantial topic, but this is one where there are so many issues raised by Todd Blanche's performance, either as Deputy Attorney General or as the acting Attorney General, that I think would in any normal times be preclusive of his serving as the Attorney General of the United States.
Melissa, one of the things that is so interesting about seeing SCOTUS going to the Hill, for me as like a history nerd, and I know for you as a big history nerd, is like it is like, oh, they are supposed to be co-equal branches because they're like going to the people with money.
Yeah.
They have their hands on. They're asking for more money for themselves. You said that the last time this happened, it was Samuel Alito. I wonder what you think about the choice of these two as the representatives. Why is it not the Chief Justice? Why is it not someone else?
So, the justices have gone to the Hill before to testify. I think they went in the wake of Bush v. Gore. They went in 2019, as you said. Justice Alito and Justice Kagan went then, and again, it was to answer questions about a budget request. And I thought it was really interesting that Justice Alito is ostensibly still on the court and Justice Kagan is still on the court, but it's only Justice Kagan is going and Justice Barrett is now stepping in for Justice Alito. I don't
think
know.
That was like a deliberate PR move?
I don't know if it's a PR move per se. I wonder if it's related to the speculation around whether or not Justice Alito may retire. He has,
and I mean, he would get tougher questions than.
Well, I think he might get tougher questions. Certainly, he has written some of the most consequential opinions of this term, like the Chief Justice, who was in the majority in many of these cases, assigned Justice Alito the decision in Louisiana versus Calais, which decimated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. He also authored the TPS decision. There are many.
Right.
So
but
maybe.
Also, is it that why would a person who's retiring be advocating
right? That's
for
what I was thinking.
Budgetary?
I mean, again, rank speculation on my part. Again, watch this space.
No, we got to read the tea leaves.
But just speculation. He's someone who sort of, I think might be willing to retire at this point. He's certainly achieved a great degree of job satisfaction in the last term, and he has a big book coming out in the fall, and the book tour is sort of timed with the start of the court's new term. Hard to say. But this question of them going before Congress, that happens quite frequently. We should remember, the court does not have the power of the purse, and this makes this so clear. They have to go hat in hand to Congress asking for these appropriations. They are asking for this appropriation increase, almost an increase of $14 million for additional security for the justices. They might also be asked, what about the lower federal courts?
Right.
Like, is there going to be a request? Because those lower federal court judges have also seen a huge uptick in threats as well.